The night he escaped was so dark it felt as if the world had stopped breathing. Snow drifted quietly over the prison camp fences, covering the watchtowers in a thin, ghostly white. The bitter wind sliced through the yard, carrying with it the faint metallic sound of boots marching in rhythm. Inside the shadows near the far wall, a lone prisoner crouched low, waiting for the 1 second when fate might finally open a door for him. His heart hammered against his ribs. His fingers were numb, and yet his mind was clearer than it had ever been. Tonight, he wasn't thinking about the beatings, the forced labor, or the endless days that blended into misery. Tonight, he thought only of one thing: escape. When the searchlight swept past and the guard turned for a brief moment, he moved, silent, precise, desperate. He slid through a gap he had widened over months of scraping stone with a stolen nail. His jacket tore on the wire, but he kept going. Dogs barked in the distance, guards shouted, gunshots cracked through the cold night air. But he didn't look back. He ran until his lungs felt like fire and his legs threatened to collapse. Hours later, half frozen and trembling, he crossed a rural road and collapsed behind a fallen tree. He was free, against all odds. He had escaped Hitler's grip. But his story didn't begin with the escape. It began long before the world fell apart. He had once lived an ordinary life, one filled with family dinners, small joys, and dreams bigger than his village allowed. He had worked in a workshop, fixing radios and tinkering with wires. He had loved a girl whose smile made the world feel a little less cruel. He believed people were mostly good, and that hardship never lasted forever. But when the war came, everything changed. Neighbors disappeared, friends were arrested, and he, outspoken and unafraid to call injustice by its name, was marked as a threat. One evening, men in black coats arrived at his home. They didn't knock. They dragged him out in front of his family, accusing him of treason, sabotage, and aiding the wrong people. None of it was true. All of it was enough to get him thrown into a camp where truth didn't matter. The camp crushed most men within weeks, but he refused to break. Even when sickness hollowed him out. Even when he witnessed brutality no human should ever see. Even when hope felt like an impossible burden. And slowly, a thought formed, dangerous, impossible, but persistent: escape. He didn't plan it overnight. It took months. He memorized guard rotations, counted footsteps, learned which dogs were restless and which were lazy, identified weak points in the fence. He saved scraps of bread and dug quietly at the stone wall near his barracks until his fingertips bled. Every day he risked his life preparing for a chance that might never come. And yet, he made it out. But freedom didn't feel like salvation. As he made his way through frozen fields and forest paths, he couldn't stop thinking about the faces he left behind. People who would never escape unless someone returned for them. He pictured the old man who shared his water, the teenager beaten for dropping a shovel, the woman who sang softly at night to remember she was still alive. He had saved himself, but they were still trapped in hell. When he finally reached a safe zone, resistance fighters stared at him in disbelief. No one escaped that camp. No one survived long enough even to attempt it. But here he stood, a ghost of a man, wounded, starving, but alive. They treated his injuries, fed him soup, wrapped him in blankets. They urged him to flee farther, to leave the region, to disappear before the Germans realized who he was. But while they spoke, he felt a growing ache in his chest. Not fear, not exhaustion, but responsibility. And one night, sitting in a candlelit cellar surrounded by maps and whispered voices, he made a decision that shocked everyone there. He would go back, not to surrender, not to hide, not to die, but to save others. The resistance tried to stop him. They warned him it was suicide. They told him the camp would be on high alert, the guards suspicious, the fences repaired. But he knew the routines. He knew the prisoners. He knew the places where fear hid the deepest. And he knew he couldn't live with himself if he stayed safe while others suffered. His return was more dangerous than his escape. He disguised himself as a farmhand, slipping across fields and back roads. He carried forged papers, food hidden in sacks, and instructions memorized so perfectly he could recite them in his sleep. He moved through villages where German patrols prowled, speaking only when necessary, avoiding eye contact, keeping his face down. At night, he approached the outskirts of the camp again. This time as a rescuer. He started with one escapee, a young man he had befriended inside. He signaled him during a work detail, whispering instructions with only seconds to spare. That night, near the fence, the young man slipped out using the same gap the escapee once widened. They crawled through the snow, hearts pounding, and vanished into the trees. Within months, he saved more. He learned how to bypass patrols, how to divert attention, how to smuggle people out under carts or through drainage ditches. He brought forged documents that transformed prisoners into factory workers, couriers, or civilians. Every rescue risked not only his life but theirs. Every night he ventured close to the camp. He felt the cold barrel of fate pressing against his spine. But he didn't stop. He returned again and again, each time saving someone who believed they would die there. He saved the elderly, the injured, the young, the terrified. People who would have never escaped without him. People whose children and grandchildren exist today because of his impossible bravery. Eventually, the war shifted. The camp was liberated. The guards fled. The nightmare ended. But when records were written, medals handed out, and speeches given, his name was barely mentioned. Heroes are often loud, their stories dramatic, their victories recorded in bold letters. But he had never acted for recognition. He acted because he couldn't bear to live in a world where he did nothing. He returned to an ordinary life after the war, worked quietly, loved deeply, lived simply, and never once boasted about what he had done. Yet his legacy lived through every person he saved, through every family they later raised, through every generation that exists because he turned back into the fire he had escaped. His story is proof that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to act despite it. And sometimes, the greatest heroes are the ones the world never learns about.